So for this workshop, we're going to be taking a look at Adobe Illustrator. And Illustrator is a totally different setup from Photoshop or from working with the iPad. So the important thing to note is that Illustrator uses vectors instead of pixels. A pixel contains an amount of information that creates a larger whole, and the image quality is affected by how much information is in each dot per inch and how many dots per inch there are relative to the canvas size. So vector graphics are completely different from pixels. There's a very technical description of what a vector is from Wikipedia that you can go through if you are interested. I think one of the main lines is vector graphics have the unique advantage over raster graphics in that the points, lines, and curves may be scaled up or down to any resolution with no aliasing. So, in other words, Adobe Illustrator uses vectors that can be sized up or down at any size and retain the same image quality. Images are built using layers of individual shapes and lines that are formed using points. And I'll show you a little bit more about that. But I just want to show you some examples of work that I've created using Illustrator. This image is just made with different shapes. Every single line or little square in detail is created using individual shapes. You can work with texture. It's very different. In Photoshop, you would use a textured brush. With Illustrator, really, I look for textures. You could try creating your own texture, and it's basically a layer that goes over your image. So even this texture that's here, all of these little tiny shapes are still individual shapes that someone created. Illustrator is also great for working with typography because it can go at any size. It's not going to get pixelated. It's going to remain really clear. This is a logo created for a local podcast. So I started in the iPad and then basically traced over everything using vector shapes in Illustrator. This is a piece that was created for Alaska Airlines with a design studio that I work with frequently. So again, looking at all of these things, all of these buildings are made out of lots and lots of shapes. So this one took a really long time. Sorry, this one's a little fuzzy. This is a JPEG of the original Illustrator file. But so, like, if we look here at this little trolley car, this rectangle is a shape. Each of these windows is an individual shape. This red rectangle, the entire trolley car is made from one shape. So, like, what you're looking at is just layers and layers of shapes. Like this building, that's a pain. But what's nice is you can select a shape and then copy and paste it. So like for this building, I'll go back here. For this building, there's a bunch of windows, but I was basically able to do one window and then copy and paste it around. So repetition can be your friend. This was created again for the house that Lars built, using lots of just graphic shapes and putting them and organizing them together to create different patterns. This was an advent calendar. Again, all of these different shapes here. So this would be one whole shape, and then again, copying and pasting. But so when you're working in Illustrator, it's definitely a different approach than working with pixels and creating it with, a brush stroke. But you can still think about an illustration. You just might approach it a little bit differently, but you can still do a lot of fun things. This is a recent project that I just finished for Valentine's Day. And so this is our candy bars and little wrappers for matchsticks. And I'm going to show you kind of how I approach that. And so this actually will be inspiration for your workshop assignment. You will, following this video, create a creative candy bar label using Adobe Illustrator. Your candy label should be 3 by 7 inches. You can begin with an initial sketch idea and bring that in and trace over it, but the final label should be created in Illustrator. Also include a short paragraph reflecting on what you've learned in this workshop, and you can include any bullet points of tips that might have been helpful for you or just things that you learned. Okay, so I'll take you kind of behind the scenes of this label. So here at the bottom, these are my original sketches that I created in the iPad. So these are all made with pixels. And then what I did was I really just traced my drawing. So I started with the pen tool or the point tool. Let's see, I think I'm on. Oh, all of my layers are locked, which I do like to keep that as a habit, especially when I'm done with the piece. So here, I'll show you how I do my X. So I'm going to take the eyedrop tool just to get the color I want. And I'm going to start here with my first point. I'm going to create kind of a curve. Create my next point. Another curve. And then I might go in and kind of adjust it and say, well, I want this to be more straight there. And then I try to use the least amount of points as possible just to keep things streamlined and easier to work with. So this is not technically connected to the other shape. Bring this corner down. And then sometimes, a lot of times, it won't be exactly the way that you want. So you'll have to go in and kind of refine it. That feels pretty good. And then create my last line. So where the shapes overlap, sometimes it's important to be aware of them right now because they're eventually going to create one shape. I'm not worried so much about it. And again, you can see this is not exactly what the final will look like. I'm going to come in and refine all of these points. Here it's just really jaggedy. If I wanted to, I could come and make that really sharp. I want it to be a rounded point. So this process can be a little bit tedious, but there's definitely some advantages to working with Illustrator. It just is able to keep things pretty clean, and there also might be some other programs that Illustrator is compatible with. I know for this company, their audience has some crafters, so they use a Cricut machine, which takes SVG files. If you don't know what that means, that's okay. Just the point is, it might be useful. Okay, that might work. That might be okay. So that's pretty much what I did to create this XOXO. I'm going to select all of that, bring it over here, kind of double check again. This is still, I mean, yeah, I guess this isn't quite perfect either. It could be more perfect. So this little curve, I can work on refining that even more. And even that definitely made a difference. That feels a lot better. Okay, so one last thing that I would do here is there might be some shapes that you do want to group together. So I'm going to select all three of those shapes that are creating this X right now. And over here in Pathfinder, I can click on this button that will kind of merge all of these shapes together. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So let's see. Yeah, that kept the integrity of everything pretty well. If it doesn't, another option is to press Command G or Control G, and that will group things together so that when you click on one shape, then it will treat all of the shapes as a whole. Just some things to kind of keep in mind. And a lot of this I've just found out through kind of troubleshooting and finding out new things. So yeah, that's how you kind of build a file in Illustrator. Okay, so just like with Photoshop, you can kind of set up your board. So I have the tools, little toolbar on the left, and then we have a few different things on the right as well. I'm just going to start by doing a new document. Okay, so I have a board set up, and you can see that now there's more things happening. On the right toolbar, we have colors, brush strokes, and a few different things. So I'll show you things that are important for getting started. Obviously with Photoshop and Illustrator, they're set up differently. Photoshop works with pixels, Illustrator works with vectors. So if you do want to come in and edit your board, you'll go to the document setup, which was in File, Document Setup. And I usually just edit the artboard. I'm going to press Command R to make the rulers appear. And if I want to, I can bring it down. So now it's 11 by 7.5 inches if I want it to be. But you can also edit the board when you begin your project. So to create shapes, usually what you're doing is you're layering different shapes on top of each other. And so if you want to do something that's more graphic or geometric, Illustrator is really great at being able to make those perfect crisp shapes. It can be really frustrating if you're trying to make something really organic. The other thing to know is that when you're making a shape, we have our fill color and then you have your line color. And so you can see that here, this is, where the color is. You can also come down here and it will tell you these are the colors for the shape that you're making. We also have, starting here with the cursors. So this is let's see, I don't know if it'll tell us. Oh, it's not telling us. So there's two different cursors here, and they will do different things. So let's first start then with the pen tool, and we'll come back to the cursors. So your pen tool is probably going to be one of the best ways for you to make shapes. I'm going to make a blue shape, and I'm going to I selected the line or the stroke, and I'm going to make it purple. So I'm just going to make a really basic square. So now I'll show you what the cursors do. So when you're making your shape, each point is something that you can change in Illustrator. So if I come here with this cursor, this will help me manipulate an individual point. Whereas if this top cursor, that will affect the whole shape. Okay, so that's the difference between those two. If you don't want a stroke, then you can come here and the stroke is now in front. I could click the fill and have that come to the front, but I want to focus on the stroke. And if you come here to this little box that has a cross through it, that basically is saying, I don't want a stroke. There's a few places where you can do that. So here, you can put the stroke back in. So here, the stroke weight on the right toolbar is at 1 point. I could make it really large. So now it's at 30 points. Or you could even just bring it down to 0 and get rid of it that way. So there's a few different ways to do different things. Okay. So another way you can make shapes is here, right click. So, these shapes, rectangle, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, and star. I don't use these things very often. I am usually making my own shapes. There's this tool, which I think is the pencil tool. Okay. Honestly, I never use this tool because I find it difficult to use. But if you want to play around with that, you can. So that's, I don't see if you hover over the name and if it shows up. This is the curvature tool. So you could use that tool if you want to make a shape that's a little bit more organic. But when you're creating a shape with the pen tool, you can also make curves. So how you do that is I'm going to make a point, but I'm going to continue holding it down. And I can basically make these handlebars, which help to control the way that the line curves. It's a really kind of odd way of working with shapes, but once you get the hang of it, you can do some pretty interesting things and figure out how to, mimic organic lines. If you want to change a point, so I selected this point with a point selector cursor, and now I'm going to come up here. At least this is where it is in my Illustrator program. It might be somewhere else for you, but so I can basically change whether the point has a rounded handle or if I don't want it to have handles. So I just changed, clicking on this basically adds a curved handlebar. But if I want to then make it so it's not curvy, I can use that. So I can go over here and say, well, I want this one not to be curved. I want it to be a point. So those are some pretty important things to know in Illustrator. You can also do gradients. Let's see if we can apply a gradient here. The way that the gradient works is, let's see. Might have to come over here and see if there's a place. Okay, here's the gradient tool. Oh, So see, it just applied to this one. You can kind of change where. I might have to go to my other cursor. Okay, it might be a little annoying to play around with, but depending on how you play around with this bar, you can make different gradients. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, other important things. So it's really important to organize your layers. Just like we've kind of talked about it with Photoshop with our Rizzo file, the Illustrator layers, they'll just be really important as you start to layer up different objects. Because I might want to select all of these different things. So let's say I make a tool or a shape, sorry. So that's now on my other layer. I can still select all of them together. But maybe like if I want to lock this first layer and only select what's on the other layers, that can just be really helpful if you're trying to stay organized, especially if you start to have a really complicated file. Some other things that are important is the pathfinder. So you can find that in the window. So you can kind of customize the different things that you have going on in Illustrator. Pathfinder is definitely one that's important for me generally. So let's say like I want to combine, I'm gonna unlock that. I want to combine these two square shapes and I want it to be one shape. So I can do that. So I'll come down here to my Pathfinder box and this I think will do that. Yeah, so it took away the stroke so that they're the same. If I want to put a stroke back on it, I can. But now, this is all one shape, basically. So if you kind of make a few different shapes, and then you want them to become one object, that's an option. And then there's a few different things that you can play around with here. With Illustrator, I usually just recommend, kind of keeping it simple, look things up as you go. It is pretty good with type. It's not going to pixelate your type. Also, generally, if I'm trying to do type on an arc, I actually usually come and mock it up in Illustrator because you can select this arc tool and, okay, so it just made kind of a generic one for me. I can go in and edit that if I want, but it looks pretty good. And then I'm going to press T for text. And when it changes from this little symbol to this one, that's when I know that it's actually going to type on the line. Let's see if it might be, it should be showing up. I'm not sure why, if it's too small or if it's too large. That's strange. Let me try again. I wonder if it's too small. So you can kind of change the way that the arc looks. I just pressed shift to make it more uniform. Maybe I'll make it, come on, really big. There we go. And see, like now it's not on the layer I want it to be. So I'm going to put it here. So that's something fun that you can play around with. The last thing that I'm going to show you today is there's a really great way to make circle, or basically to make objects revolve around other objects. So let's create this point. So let's say I want to have several of these circles perfectly around the other circle. So what you're going to do is you're going to select the object that you want to rotate, and then you're going to come over here to the rotate button, and you're going to press Alt and then click, and that will bring up this rotate box, and then you will figure out what degree that you want. So I'm just going to do a 15-degree angle, and then you're going to press copy, and then you're just going to press Command D over and over and over again. If you want, so you might play around with that. Let's say we make a new shape, and then we want this guy. And this will obviously change because it's not a circle. Circles are easier. But we'll do rotate, and basically we'll move that center point. Okay, so we have here, rotate, Alt, click. So let's say we want 25. I didn't press copy. So this can be a little bit finicky, but like when you figure it out, I literally have to relearn it every time that I want to do it, but it can be super helpful. Okay, so we have select, and then rotate, option, click. So I have my 25, copy, and now it will evenly distribute them. I'm going to copy Z. So it might be something that you need to play around with to get it exactly right, and you might want to do some math. But I usually just play around with it till I get it the way that I want it to. The last thing I'll show you is how to save. That's pretty much the same as Photoshop, except that now your options to save are different. So you really only have AI, which is Illustrator, or you could save it as a PDF. Occasionally I've saved things as an EPS or an SVG, but the easiest thing is an AI file. So you'll just tutorial works, and make sure to save it where you know it will be, and then just save. You can come in and I think the default is usually pretty good, but it's always good to double check. What's nice about AI files is they're pretty small. You can email them generally, which is nice. Yeah,